All right, welcome back to another episode of the Apparatus Workshop, brought to you by Fire Apparatus Emergency Equipment. Here today, obviously, Nick Wilbur, joined with Winslow, as always, and a returning guest, Alex Moody, here to talk about rescue squads and the heavy part of heavy rescue squads. More specifically, we're going to kind of dive into single axle versus tandem axle versus walk-in, non-walk-in, when you need it, when you don't, the equipment carried on it, and how kind of when you're looking at not the rescue engine side, but now that heavier, larger rescue squad, how we can kind of, the questions we can ask and how we can shape that vehicle for our response area, for our statistics, for our people, and kind of the positives and negatives through it. So what we should be looking at before we go and we purchase this large vehicle. So since this was kind of Alex's idea, we'll kick it to him first, and we'll kind of dive into that walk-in versus non-walk-in. What's the kind of difference? And, do you have to have a walk-in where you sit in the back or do you not? Like, kind of just go through the options that might be available or things that you've seen out there with that kind of thought process.
Yeah. So, the body style, a lot of that, it can be decided based on preference. I mean, you have the walk-ins where you sit in the back, and that's the one that everyone thinks is the coolest. I think it gets all the social media points. I know Wynn has his opinions. But even then, it's a choice. There's no clear, you're always going to lose space in the middle of the walk-in. And depending on your design, that could be 30% of that cube, that box that you have to put stuff in is either walkway, whether you're sitting back there or you're not. And it's compartment space. If you're not putting a walk in there and your compartments are transverse, well, you still have to use that entire box up. And I don't care who you are, you're going to have slides in there, different ways of mounting your tools. There's going to be empty space. So you kind of have to just accept the fact that you're going to use it as efficiently as you can if you do your job right. But ultimately, you're not going to have every square inch or square cubic foot of that space packed with stuff. The walk-in seats or no seated is nice because you can have equipment that needs to be pretty quickly accessed. Either you can do the roll-up thing if you want, if you're okay with taking up that space. We use webbing at work with some buckles that seems to work well, but we sit in the back. So we want all of that stuff, those tools mounted at our fingertips safely so we can get them. When you're not sitting in the back, now you're adding a step for your crew from the front to have to climb out of the cab, around the back, climb up some stairs, go inside and get equipment. So your choices for what tools you're putting back there versus what you're keeping on the exterior of your rescue, I think that's a big one. So if you're expecting to get off for fires or vehicle extrication things that are pretty rapid that we want to move with a good pace and sense of purpose, then those more critical life safety items you want on the outside. And we'll get into this later, but if you're expanding your capabilities, if you're doing things outside of the fireground and vehicle extrication realm, that's a great place for walk-ins of either variety to have that equipment because you're probably slowing your pace down, tech rescue, hazmat, whatever you're cramming into this all-in-one rig. Those things are slower. They're a little more methodical. You have time to get the equipment to plan what you're going to do. Vehicles and fires, I want tools at my fingertips. So that's where you really got to plan those. You can do walk-ups. I've seen those where the stairs in the back, they will lead you to the roof and there's all kinds of dunnage and storage on the top. Again, probably less critical items. You don't want to have to be climbing on the top of this rig every call to go grab whatever you have in those storage compartments on the roof. Those can be a little hazardous. The same reason we care about high versus low hose beds. That's not the place we want our firefighters operating at 2:00 in the morning on a regular basis. To make up for that cube, sometimes those stairs lift up. They have big slide outs. They have ways. It's not really a walk-in all the time. You can do either one. I don't know if Wynn's seen any more creative versions than the slide in or a weird combination walk-in thing with those stairs. That's kind of those versions in a nutshell. Obviously, you can talk about wheelbase when you have the whole crew sitting in the cab and then you want this huge long walk-in with all these compartments, both on the outside and storage on the inside. Now you start to expand your overall length. Your wheelbase can get bigger. Those can be different conversations for your area. Obviously, we've seen places make some pretty unique decisions in the name of maneuverability and having shorter wheelbases and departure angles and angles of approach. Hopefully that covers in a nutshell.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit a couple things there. I think, what do you want? Again, it goes back to the same thing we say all the time: is what do you want this thing to do? What's the mission of it? And if you're a rescue company who runs, essentially, vehicle accidents and occasionally run it on fires, and I think you can really kind of engage with the walk around rescue. Where all that stuff that you need on a daily basis is at hand, without having to go up. Like you said, you do lose some space. You're going to lose that space no matter what, whether it's a walk in, a walk around, or walk up. We're going to lose some space on the middle of that fire truck. So I guess the question comes down there is, how do you want to use that space? And again, it comes back to the mission of the vehicle. And what do you do? If you do rope rescue, or you need to have some water rescue equipment because you have some stuff in your area, but, it only pops off during heavy rain or once or twice a year. Is it essential to be able to grab all that stuff right away? Can we walk up a set of steps or climb a ladder and get to a dunnage compartment, once or twice a year to do that? If it's something you're doing, monthly or a little bit more, even training more on it, is the safety factor of getting that stuff and having to climb, steps and ladders and things like that to throw stuff down. Is that the way you want to, handle that? So again, I think there's some aspect there to look at. The other thing too, and we talked, you mentioned it about not liking the walk-in rescues where you ride in the back. I'm not a big fan of sitting in a hot, stuffy coffin. And that to me is what that is. But again, you get to it. Like if the other opportunity is I put a crew cab on a fire truck, and if I have to carry a whole bunch of equipment, then like you said, my apparatus is going to get a whole lot longer. We also, and this is something that we push for, is that it really is, unfortunately, it's unsafe to ride in the back of a walk-in rescue. The seat belts are not meant for that. They're not set up like that. So again, if you are looking at the overall safety, you have to have that conversation anyway. I'm not saying don't do it. I think that the way that you can handle that other ways and how you drive and teach people to drive, but it is something that you have to think about. We are not really well secured. A lot of the times the stuff isn't secured that well in the back of those units. So it is something to think about when you're looking, into that. So, but yeah, I think that's the key is what are we making it? What are we getting this thing to do? How much stuff do I need to have at hand all the time? And then if not, how often do I have to get it? How safe can I make it to get to that when I do need to do it? I think that kind of drives you into like, all right, well, here's what we're going to do. Or at least it starts that conversation.
Yeah, I think when you go into the back walk-in, there's other components that you have to consider too. Even if you're not putting people back there to sit and ride when you're going up and down the road. So there's the walk-through that we didn't really talk about, where you can have that walk-in space. There might be some seats, but those aren't the primary seating positions when you're responding to and from calls. Some will use that for like water rescue to go back and get your gear on, or as like a rehab decon area after a fire, after, some sort of special ops incident. But having HVAC and stuff back there adds, some costs and weight, some things like that to consider. So maybe the smaller HVAC unit in the front, if you have like a stubby or a short nosed 2-person cab in the front, will save you some money, right? There's just cost benefit analysis there to look at. And then how that AC or heating unit is run. We found that out kind of the hard way with our rescue squads, that when you're going back and forth on and off from rigs or from the rig from calls, if it's just short responses, you don't really have a whole lot of time for the AC to run and cool the box down. And so we didn't have it hooked up. We had it hooked up to the generator, but the vehicle had to be running. So if you just do this short shot and then you're back in the firehouse, short shot back in the firehouse. Now in the firehouse, it's kind of heating up. Every time you get out there, it doesn't have enough to cool down. So on a hot day that you're running a lot of storm, calls or something like that, it can get pretty warm back there. So there's different challenges that you have to overcome when you're putting people in the back there. And I think safety, some thought processes there are huge. there are obviously a lot of positives too, where if you do it right and you mount all the equipment back there, it can be safer because you are now bringing everything with you. Everything is secured and mounted. You don't have a lot of people trying to make things up in this crew cab where they're trying to stuff 20 pounds of stuff in a 5-pound bag. So it gives you a little bit more space and room to kind of spread things out, have access to the equipment for the different calls you might run readily at your fingertips and very quickly. We don't feel the need that you have to toss bags in the cab unsecured or be doing crazy things on the way to a call because you're behind the ball because it's going to take you so long once you get there. So I think there are ways that you can set either one up and still be successful with the thought process, again, of what you're going to do and how you're going to need to do it when you get there. But that, I think that seating is like the first kind of thing to consider, right? Which one are you going to go with and how are you going to use that center tunnel in the back? One thing we didn't really talk about is for fire duty is putting ladders back there. That's probably one of the few ways you can probably use that space in its entirety is putting ground ladders back there. There's very few, they call them city service rigs. I know Atlanta put out a couple as like reserve truck companies without the aerial up top. And they have a complement of ground ladders back there. That's a great spot that you can tuck some ground ladders, some longer shoring, even wood, lumber, right? If you're going into that more technical rescue realm, that can kind of keep it out of the way if you're not going to do that walk-in portion. So I think that's something to kind of consider too. Like, is this going to go to fires and run vehicle extrications? Is this just a specialty rig? Is this kind of the everything fits all? Do you have a ladder truck in quarters with you? Can this be the backup to it? Is it going to have a pump and a tank? Just all that stuff is part of that conversation. But I think it's definitely worth exploring and looking at that too. That's something that's rarely done, but could probably be done more.
And something, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think at the end of the day, and 90% of the fire departments in the country are probably fine with a walk around rescue of some sort, right? It's when we get into these big urban areas or not even urban. I mean, it could be a more rural area depending on what you cover. Like where I live, a majority of us have gone away from even walk around rescues back to a squad type or a rescue pumper style. But somebody has to pick that up, right? So who's going to be the rescue company for your area? And then that kind of drives that decision for them. Like, all right, well, we are now the big rescue for everywhere around here in a rural environment. Again, you get into an urban or semi-suburban type department where, I think you might have to increase some of the skills and the tactics and the stuff that you see might be different too. So that might drive that. But I think 90% of the country is probably fine in a walk around rescue, right?
I would agree. And then I think and we dealt with this last night. We had a cut job last night, and there is no situational awareness in a walk-in for the people in the back. You can see about this much out the back door. You don't have a periscope. There is a camera mount on the front, but we really don't know what's going on. So we roll up on the cut job. I know roughly where we're going because we're all pulling up different mapping apps to make sure we see where the accident is and helping the driver. We get on scene. The captain has to say, vehicle on all fours directly in front of us. That way I at least know where we are parked in relation to that vehicle, what its orientation is. So what equipment I need to care about first before I do anything else. Like, what am I going to bring with me so I'm not traveling empty-handed? So it requires a little more communication, and you got to wear those headsets because the intercom in the back I don't know, it's not worth much. You're not having a meaningful conversation with that intercom. So you have to use the headsets, and your front seaters, your driver and your officer, need to be willing to communicate more to their back step than they normally would in a traditional cab. It's kind of a plus or a minus thing, but you got to keep that in mind.
Well, so let's I guess talk about the heavy rescues, like instead of the walk arounds this time. Let's kind of what would drive you from one to the other in a single axle or dual axle? What are some things as the guys who ride them and spend some time on them? Kind of where does that breakover point? Like, hey, I'm okay with a single axle rescue, but no, you know what? We need to go into a tandem axle. And again, we'll stick with the straight walk-in rescues for this one, or for now anyway, and just kind of if we're looking at building and buying a fire truck and you're on the committee as a rescue squad member, what might say, listen, we need to increase here, or we can downgrade this to a single or vehicle?
You got to get real comfortable with a scale in the bay and doing some research, because really it's going to come down to weight. How much are you going to carry? And you guys have talked about this about ladder trucks. You talk about it with engines. It all matters. So you need to start looking at the average weight of the equipment you need to carry. So if you're going to carry that 6,000 to 8,000 pound range, probably a single axle might do it for you. You start climbing up into that 10 to 12,000 range, and plus you're going to start putting some strain on the rig you're designing by sticking with a single axle. And I mean, those are ballpark numbers, and you guys might be able to dial in even further, but I think that's a good place to start. And that involves, if you have a rescue now, you're doing great. Go buy yourself a scale and start weighing equipment. I happen to know for a fact that you can go online and start looking up most of the equipment you want to carry, whether it's battery-powered extrication tools, hardline hydraulic tools with pumps, whether it's an electrical pump or a gas-powered pump, whatever you want. There's dual units that do both. They weigh a little more. So the cribbing you're going to carry, 4x4s, you can look up. These weights are known. You can Google them right now and find out how much weight you got to carry if you're going to carry struts. Those can weigh anywhere from 24 pounds of strut up to 40 pounds of strut, depending on what you're doing. Certainly, the extrication tool complement, there's still a debate, I think, in the fire service. I think you guys have seen it, that people don't necessarily trust the battery power tools. I happen to have developed trust in those battery power tools because we've used them enough. But they all weigh different ones. There's lighter and heavier ones, and it's like anything else. You can get into some brands that are going to weigh 20 to 30 pounds, and then you got brands that are closer to 30 to 45 and 50 pounds. It just depends on what you're going to carry and how much you're going to carry it. Cord reels take up a bunch of space. So if you're not going to carry cord reels, are you going to decide to carry 9 extrication tools? Whereas back in the day, people would carry maybe an all nines cutter, a large spreader, and then maybe they would have a combi tool and maybe some smaller real estate spreaders. So I think the conversation about which heavy rescue you want to go with, whether it's a single or dual or tandem axle, ultimately comes down to what you're talking about, which is if we're running fires and we're running vehicle extrications, that's it. I think you can probably tailor your complement to a single axle, smaller unit. If you're branching into anything beyond those, and certainly if you're going to go kind of dual service with your struts, if you're going to carry equipment that is capable of doing more than one discipline, i.e. structural collapse, then you need to carry more of that equipment. You need to carry more lumber. You might need to carry more large whalers. So all of those things are going to add weight to what you need. So like a standard vehicle extrication kit that you could also use on structural collapse is going to weigh like 1,300 pounds. So if you're, that's not a ton of weight in the span of a 10,000 pound capacity, but that is a tenth of what you said that is the max we're going to put on a single axle. So now add in all of the other stuff that you might decide to dual purpose, airbags, other kinds of lifting items, all your air bottles, SCBAs, all those things. Just in one category, you've taken up a tenth of your capacity. So that's super important, is to go out and find these weights and what your job is going to be. The famous quote, the mission of the vehicle, that job is going to dictate those weights.
I think there's 2 other things that cut in there too. As you started mentioning those things, I mean, in the back of my mind, I thought about who and how, right? So are they going to be, how many people are going to be showing up to operate this vehicle, and how are they going to do it? AKA, like, what's their training? And, is it regimented, and is it, state level classes? Is there going to be in-house training as well? And so, we go around and we look, and you see these vehicles that are very well equipped, and you look at average staffing for them, and they're 2 or 3 people. And at the end of the day, it's like, all right, well, we go back to what Wynn brought up with the walk around rescue, going into that squad or rescue engine or engine rescue concept. That you don't have the people, then at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter, right? You could buy the biggest, greatest vehicle in the world, but if 2 people show up on it and you have all these struts and collapse capability, that's cool. But who's actually coming to do it, right? And what are they bringing? the other side of that too is, how often are you using that stuff? And, what's the travel distance and likelihood of using that? Does that turn into then maybe a support vehicle? And we saw that in upstate New York. They had, rescue engine. It was a rescue squad with a small pump and a tank and a ladder truck. They combined the services of those two units together into the ladder truck. So they went with some tools on it. And then they had this second vehicle that carried some more struts and some more equipment. It was like a little F550 vehicle that they could roll out with extra staffing and extra people to bring more equipment for vehicle extrication. I thought that was a pretty interesting idea, because if you have a door pop, you roll in one vehicle, you're good to go. And if you have 3 or 4 people, easily done with a door pop. You start getting into more complex things where you're pulling out chain and struts and other stuff, like you're going to need a little bit more staffing. So if there's staffing, then they're going to get that vehicle out. If they don't, then we're calling mutual aid anyway. And so now we've taken weight and compartment space off of this vehicle, but we still have the equipment available to our people if they're there to respond. So I think there's a lot of conversations there of, like, when are we going to use this equipment? How are we going to use this equipment? Who's going to use this equipment? And then what training are we going to provide as a department to support these operations? You go through and talk to some of these chiefs, or, someone that comes in new to a fire department, career or volunteer, and you start asking questions like, oh, well, so-and-so's our rope guy or collapse guy, and him and Jim and Bob are 3 tech rescue guys. Well, how many calls do they make? Well, they make like 50%. So 50% of the time, you're never going to use this stuff. That's if the call comes out when they're on the rig and all 3 of them are there, that you even have a chance to use a lot of this equipment. And they start thinking about it and like, well, yeah. Well, how much training do they get after their initial training? When did they get it? Was it 10 years ago? Because that training's probably not good anymore if they're not using their skills. So is it something that we should even be doing now at this point? Should we just be taking that equipment off, love their training, get them involved in maybe more of a regional team, or have some sort of a support unit that if they're available, now they can take that equipment with them, and we make sure that the properly trained people are operating that equipment. Last thing you want to do is show up with a bunch of stuff that no one knows how to use, but feels like they need to do something. That's the fire department mantra. We want to do something. So if you give people equipment that they don't know or how to use or aren't trained, they can get into a pretty rough spot. So I think that's worthy of the conversation as well.
Yeah, and I think that's, again, I think back in the, late 80s, early 90s, the specialty teams, tech rescue, hazmat became a big thing. And you had departments going out and, kind of getting that training and becoming, proficient at rope rescue and dive and things like that. It's things that I've seen throughout my career has been big and then has gone away. And as they go away, if you're not looking at, all right, well, we don't have the people who are trained on that anymore. We don't have anybody who can dive, or we don't have anybody who knows how to tie, a handful of knots and run the new, all of the new equipment that's out. Then are we still able to provide that service, and can we drop it down? Are we just building an apparatus to keep, an antiquated service that we can't really provide anymore because we've always done it that way? And I think that comes into that conversation that you have to have is, are we even still able to do this and be an asset to the area that we're providing service to?
And don't undersell the maintenance of all of the equipment that you're deciding you want to pay for. It's awesome to get all that shiny new equipment in the box when you get the rig in service and you're putting all these tools on there the first time. It looks great. And assuming you're doing the training cycle you should be doing to maintain that competency, that stuff will break. You will be going to your logistics section and saying, I have broken things that I need you to fix just because we chose to train today, not even because you used it on a call and something went wrong. And a lot of these companies that you buy this equipment from, they have service contracts, but that costs money. And that doesn't necessarily show up when you're looking at the evaluation of the vehicle. You're not necessarily capturing, okay, I'm now using this vehicle and I know how much PMing costs and my price per mile on that thing if you're doing your job right there. But what does the equipment cost? Every time I go out and train, I got to spend $500 on average because once a month we train on it and we break $500 worth of equipment. And that could just be wear and tear. It's not even people doing things wrong. You start breaking these struts out because you want to go operate in a trench. Dirt gets in there, starts ruining things. It's not designed to work dirty forever. So add that into your overall plan.
And then
So what I hear,
you go in a replacement cycle too, like rope and stuff like that, right? Like, 10 years is shelf life for rope and equipment. So if you buy a rig that you're looking to last 20 years, are you at 10 years looking to pay for new rope? And then are you using the frontline rope to do training? Well, maybe you shouldn't or should, depending on how much use you have, right? For us in Arlington, we're very fortunate. We do a lot of training. We have a lot of people to train across the different shifts. So we have different training rope. Well, that still has to meet the standard too, because we're going out on it. So you can't just have 20-year-old rope that you rotate off the rig. That's your training rope. You need to have rope that's 10 years or less older so that you can operate in training environment as well. That's how we look at that standard. That's how we interpret it. Now that's, again, interpretation. You could maybe use however you want and whatever you're comfortable with. And that goes up again to the AHJ. But the liability there and for the safety of our people, we want to make sure we have the right equipment in the right spot. And so every 5 years, then, are you going to replace rope or add rope to the system, or taking everything at the 10-year mark and just full wholesale replacing it? So that's a lot to take into account.
Yeah. I mean, to me, it sounds like we're talking ourselves out of these big rescues for a lot of people. And I think that's good. I think that I think it's good. I think have those conversations, right?
I think it's so easy for people to look at places like we're in a bubble inside the DC metropolitan region. We're in a bubble where we have all these resources, we have this money, and it's less hard for us to go make these decisions. If you are out anywhere in the US that doesn't have that same bubble of influence and financing, you may have to make that different choice. And certainly if you are going to decide that, hey, our department has the staffing and we're going to be that resource for the neighboring 5 departments, you might want to go talk to them and see if they're willing to open the checkbook and be like, hey, we need help. Like, we're willing to come to you and be this resource for you. And we guarantee these responses, but it costs money for us to do this. And if you're an all volunteer organization, that's a full-time job to go out and get money for stuff. So ask your neighbors for help.
And give us the checkbook and the people.
Yeah, that's not easy. I don't want to undersell that for these departments that are just trying to get rigs out the door.
Well, we're going to show up with 4. You need to provide the other 6 to 10 people on a confined space or some sort of a working technical rescue so we can make this work, right? That's the other side for sure.
So since we sound like we're talking into downsizing, which, I mean, I don't think that was the goal here, but it kind of, again, it kind of leads to that. Let's talk about what are the benefits of going, and we'll stay with the walk-in rescues because I think that's really where we wanted to go today, was kind of the heavy rescue concept. So what are benefits to potentially downsizing from that tandem axle to a single axle rescue?
I think you can make some really conscious decisions on what tools you are going to carry, because there are 10 different manufacturers of 10 different tools to do the same job that you want to do. And it can get overwhelming to pick 8 different manufacturers and different colored tools to do all these different skill sets. So for me, if you choose to limit yourself, you've given yourself this single axle box, and you're going to do a max of 10,000 pounds of equipment. Now I'm going to be very thoughtful. You ever go to a restaurant and their menu is like a book? It is just like you can fan yourself flipping through the pages. You probably know it's not that great of food. Like you're not going to get the great, because there's no way the cook in the back can cook 200 different dishes and it's a 5-star meal. Like it's just not. So if you put a menu of items on your rescue and you're expecting, especially if you are out in a place where you're all volunteer and you're trying to make that work, your people aren't going to maintain proficiency on 10 different kinds of impact wrenches. Like it's not going to work, let alone carrying the batteries and assorted attachments for those things, or even extrication tools, whatever. So I would say streamline, like go through, if we are going to respond to fires, these are the tools that my people are going to carry. If we have a max of 3 people in the back plus the 2 up front, only design the rig to carry enough tools for them, and be thoughtful. Like one of you is going to bring irons, one of you is going to bring a hook and a can, and maybe the other one's going to bring like a pig or something like that, whatever. It doesn't matter. Put those tools on the rig. You don't need 8 Halligan bars. We have, all three of us, seen more halogen bars on rigs than people will ever have on that rig. You don't have to supply the entire fire ground with halogen bars. Same with your extrication tools. You need good cutters and you need good spreaders. And the best extrication teams work together. Cutters working right next to somebody with spreaders, communicating and making decisions on how they're going to make space into that passenger compartment. Those are the best extrication teams. And that's taking out the entire complicated piece of stabilization. So you need cribbing. So I'm a proponent of wood, but you can make that decision if you guys want to go the poly way, but there's decisions to be made there. You have to make sure that you're only carrying the stuff your people need to use, and you can really dive in and make sure your people have a small menu they can be proficient on and train on consistently. I think that's the benefit of downsizing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you say downsizing too, and I think it's more of a right sizing. It goes back to the people available, the training they have. And, as we start putting all this stuff on the rig, there's a lot of pressure for people. And I know, at work, for us, there's people who get overwhelmed and, kind of, holy crap, this is a lot. And it is. And so that's, it's a good thing and a bad thing, right? Like, are you willing to put in the work to do this and learn it and be good at it? Because in our region, there's a lot more people to protect, a lot more craziness going on, buildings, high rises, mid rises, low rises, digging holes, water, everything in between, right? Confined spaces, collapse. Like we have that whole entire threat all in a little tight bubble. And those incidents can be really large in our area. So like we need to have those resources available for those people. But, you get to these smaller departments, like we haven't talked about this yet, but like who else is coming? Can you have option A and B on your rescue squad and your neighbor 20 minutes away has option C and D? Like you don't have to all have option A or you don't have to all have option B. So like communicate with the region, right? We do a great job in our region to an extent. We do a good job, I'll say, not great, but good job communicating and working together and having like a lot of good resources for use for everybody and responding together and working together on incidents. But, is it a conversation, hey, we're going to bring cutters, spreaders, everything battery powered. We're going to have stuff to stabilize a small vehicle, but we're going to be really good at rope. We're going to have all the rope stuff. And then you guys over there get the heavier stabilization stuff. So be good if we have like a, condo building, if we have a large vehicle and you're going to bring some chain and some other stuff. So if we have a big incident, we're going to both go together and we're going to have we'll do the rope side, you do the stabilization side, and kind of have those conversations. Now we can shrink that vehicle down. We can get really good at what we're doing. And now we call each other. Now it's good. We're running more calls, like the good calls. And, when you're getting called out, you're going to go to work. And it's like a good shared resource. Now the money for the rope is worth it because you're sharing costs. You're not paying all that money for chain and heavier stabilization stuff and the training required for that. So like, how can we together as a region go through and then go to those other smaller departments and maybe cost share some of that stuff? Like, hey, we have to replace the rope. Can you guys buy the rope? You guys buy some of the hardware and we're going to provide that service for you. Now it's every 10 years, it's X number of dollars. Here's our inventory. We're not going to change it and cost you more. Now some of that stuff comes in free, but we're going to pay for the training for our people still. So everyone's paying a little bit of the pot. So you really just have to get creative with that and the solutions for the area. We've been to places where it's like, oh, we have all this stuff because we need to get started on these calls. And they're like, well, where's the tech rescue team coming from? Oh, well, they're 30 minutes away. All right, well, the first 30 minutes, you can have maybe these 4 things on most calls, and you're going to get stuff kind of together with the 3 or 4 people you're showing up with. Like the training and the equipment that you have available doesn't really line up, and you need the tech rescue team anyway to even just go and do anything. So it's not like you can just like hop in a trench and start like working. There's a lot of stuff that needs to happen first, and having trench panels is not the first thing. So it's like maybe we can back off of that and maybe we can just get other stuff done, like maybe ventilation and monitoring and the ladder down there. Like there's a lot of things, talking to the site crew, getting a site plan together, like so many things that can happen within that first 30 minutes. And at the end of the day, like that's the fire protection that you're able to provide. So if that's all you can do with the 3 or 4 people you have to show up, that's what it is. We can't put this facade of this big, huge rescue squad with all this equipment showing up like something's going to happen overnight. And then you get all these untrained people showing up and like, that's the show. We gotta be a little bit more truthful with that and spend the money where it needs to be spent.
And I think, and I know Nick will appreciate this, if you have to choose, if you're anywhere where you're not resource rich and your neighbors are not always bringing the things you need, you cannot decide that we're going to staff this rescue in lieu of bringing portable ground ladders to a fire. And I mean, I say that and it sounds like low hanging fruit, but at the end of the day, if your staffing is limited and you're picking between rigs or you have neighbors and hopefully you're communicating, but we all know that that's easier said than done, you need to be very concerned about the tools you need to perform either search, ventilation, or extinguishment. Those things have to be done. And you need portable ground ladders to accomplish most of those things, at least in certain scenarios. Whereas a rescue may not be the most critical piece of fire protection, specifically talking about fireground fire protection. That's not where, if I have to choose between having a ladder truck with a bunch of ladders on it and the same tools that I can bring on a rescue, or a rescue in a resource limited environment, I'm picking a ladder truck. So, I mean, that's a little off topic for this, but I think you can get into this conversation. Hey, I think we need a rescue because we have an interstate traveling through our area. Those are valid reasons to need this, but you have to balance that with your staffing and what you're already able to get to a fire ground now.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's key. It's another one of those conversations again, is this service that we provided so long ago still an important service for our community, as crumple zones, things like that. Safety in cars increases, a lot of places aren't even running rescues on their accidents anymore until it's a confirmed entrapment or, again, you talk about resources and things like that. Is our dispatch type, is our call type still what it needs to be? Or is a vehicle in accident just a glorified EMS call until, we get there and it's not? And we know majority of the time that's what it is. I mean, it's a glorified EMS call, on the highway or on the roadway that at the end of the day doesn't require any fire services at all. So if you're looking at again, that right sizing, whether it's your equipment or your fleet, even in that case, again, maybe that ladder truck as a dual purpose unit is there, right? I think you talk kind of what I've heard when Alex started talking is, all right, well, we're gonna right size, so now we can kind of limit what we're buying, things like that. So you're looking at money saving to some extent as well. And I think the other aspect of money saving, and there's two sides to it, because if we're going to, if we're going to make a ladder truck dual purpose, then we may go from a single axle ladder truck to a tandem axle ladder truck. But again, if we cut a unit out of our fleet in doing so, the cost savings is there. And it's the same thing if we're going to right size our rescue squad, but we're going to keep it. Again, we cut an axle off of it. We cut weight off of it. We cut the stress that we're going to put on that overall vehicle. Then that over the course of its lifetime is a money saving opportunity as well, right? So we take the weight off of it. Again, we can decrease the axle size, less brakes, less tires that we have to purchase, one less axle we have to purchase, things like that. And again, if the braking doesn't have to be as strong or whatever, then we can, again, that cost saving comes into that whole play there.
Yeah, I think one thing, we talked about like the fire protection thing, Alex brought that up. It was a great point. Like when we go and we look at that and we look at ISO, we look at NFPA, all of those things, there's nothing that says anything about a rescue squad, that needing one or anything. That's all AHJ, and there's really no good guidance out there on when you need a heavy rescue squad or not. And so I think when people go down that road, they want to load it with all of this stuff because they're trying to legitimize this vehicle. And that's, a good and a bad thing, right? Well, we have hazmat we have to deal with. There's industry in the area that we have to have booms for, and this, that, and the other. So it's their closet. None of that stuff ever gets used, so they toss it on there. So I think that's the first thing. Do you just have a pickup truck with actual storage unit in the firehouse? And when you run the call where you need booms, you just take them out of the storage unit, put them in the pickup truck, And like, that's how you bring them out there. You know, it's not going to be a surprise when you go to the industrial complex for a leak that you're going to the industrial complex for a leak. So I think some of that stuff could be worked out that way. And even still with the rescue squads, I mean, it's the first thing to go. Although in ISO, you get credit for a quote unquote service company, as long as you have the requisite number of tools and types of tools on it, then, you know, you can actually make forward progress on your ISO rating by not having a ladder truck, but having a service company. If you have 5 or more buildings over 35 feet from the lowest ground level, well, now you need a ladder truck, but you might get partial credit towards a ladder truck for your service company. So that's a whole nother conversation, but you can get a little bit of credit there. But with that, if you look at the first thing to go in a lot of municipalities or larger departments, and we're seeing it in our area, the first thing to go is the rescue squad. They're not going to cut engines that are, you know, huge for ISO credit. They're not going to cut ladder trucks as easily for ISO credit. They're not going to cut ambulances or medic units as easily because, again, those are for the, and those are huge, you know, emotional topics for the citizens. You say you're getting rid of a heavy rescue and people are like, what does that even do? Oh, it does all this crazy stuff. Oh, that's great. Well, we have 7 other ones, or we have 3 other ones, or the neighbor department's only 10 minutes down the road. Oh, that's not that bad. That's fine. We can wait, right? So that's like the easiest thing on the chopping block. So I think as the fire service, we need to look internally first and say like, hey, these vehicles now are getting really expensive. So how can we improve our fleet? Maybe instead of doing 20-year replacements for engines, ladder trucks, rescue squads, maybe we can combine a unit or thin this down, or maybe get this to a more compact, cheaper unit that we can replace now more often. Right. And now we're going to get more use because we're going to regionalize it. We're going to run mutual aid. We're going to be used in our neighbors' territories. So now it's going to be a little bit more worthwhile. And now we can go out there and educate the public and say, this is what this vehicle can do. And these are the areas we protect with it. And I think that would go a long way in that.
I fully agree with that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a lot of evaluation that needs to be done. It's not really just as easy as that. And again, if the need is there, and, you know, there's places that on the flip side, we'll go not contrary to what we've been saying, but on the flip side, there's places that are seeing booms now that they've never seen before, bringing in industry, bringing in housing and commercial properties, which with all of that, with all the building, brings all this tractor trailer traffic and construction work and all these new hazards they never saw before. People of 5,000 in a town are now going to 10, 20, 30,000 in the next 5 or 10 years. That's a huge boom that now we need to change what we were doing before, where the combination vehicles might not work. But with that comes the staffing and the training. So it's not a switch that you can just flip. And again, like, you know, Alex was talking about with equipment, how do we start getting our equipment in line so that we can expand it out too? Maybe choosing a choice manufacturer on certain things that now have interoperability or can be expanded out into more things down the road or higher capacities. Like, there's a lot of conversations there as that boom happens, but that there could be a switch the other way. I mean, there's a lot of places that are paring down, staffing's going away. We need to kind of reevaluate things, but there are a few out there still that they might be going through this boom that they might need to go the other way. They might need to expand out the resources. So I think all of the things we said today, even though there's that negative, not negative, but hey, you need to really consider and pare down. If some of those considerations, you're like, hey, that's not us. Like, we're the opposite. Yeah, you probably are. And that's part of the conversation. Hopefully we've at least provided some of those questions to consider and ask.
Well, and I think, go ahead, Win.
You see that too. Like, you know, we talk about, you know, you see like a contraction in some places. In large departments, maybe you see that contraction, but in smaller departments, you see where they're being forced to merge in order to stay, you know, relevant. So again, you're combining a bunch of departments together who then maybe have a similar unit, but when you look at, all right, well, it's time to start this replacement, and the word you used before is right sizing a fleet. Like, all right, well, we're going to take a squad from here and you know, or a rescue pumper from here and a rescue pumper from here, and we're going to put them together here and make it a heavy squad that can cover the whole area that we're merging together. So now we see that you know, kind of increase in that service that they're going to supply. And like you said, that stuff is popping up all over, whether it's, you know, warehousing or housing, like, you talked about the construction vehicles, things change, and you have to be able to plan for that change. And if you live in an area where the next 10 years looks like it's going to be a construction boom, well, then you got to be ready for that, and you got to kind of forecast that out.
And pay attention to your street sizes, because now if you are seeing this boom and this increase in population, this increase in building, and you do want to combine those units and make this heavy rescue, well, now you have to be really concerned about where it can go and where it can get to. And certainly just shortening the length and the wheelbase, I know it's been discussed on the podcast before, and we learned it personally, that doesn't just make you a more maneuverable unit with cramp angles and stuff. So make sure you're getting those turning reports. If you're going to build a unit, or even if you're going to buy a used one from somebody to get started, you got to make sure you get that turning report and pay attention to what the capital improvement plan for your whole city, county, jurisdiction is. Pay attention to what they're doing. Bike lanes, those take up space. Parallel parking spots, those take up space. And then they close half a lane down because they have to do construction on a stoplight that they're adding in. You still got to get through that intersection. So all those things are going to matter if you are choosing to increase to a larger unit, but in a smaller, quote unquote, area that's building up.
I think that's important. The rescue engine or engine rescue concept, Wynn talked about multiple people combining together, but you have these combined resources in this more rural suburban area and they start building up. The streets might dictate, I can't carry all this equipment anymore. I need to get down to the 30, 31 foot range on my engine. I can't afford to carry the equipment I need to carry anymore, keeping a low hose bed and all the other operational things. Maybe I have that mixed environment where I need that 750 or 1,000 gallons of water still. You can't fit it all into one platform anymore. So maybe we need to now space it out or get that support vehicle, whether it's a full rescue squad, walk around, rescue truck or whatever. But as that area starts to shrink, you need almost more vehicles to be able to get your services out of each other so that you can fit those vehicles down the street. So I think that's an important distinction, that once you start looking at those plans, even if you wanted to change your fleet around today, if you're not looking 10 years into the future, you're wrong, right? You're behind the ball. It takes 4 to get a fire truck, and we're not buying 2 or 3 at a time in a small, municipality. So that could be your fire truck purchase by the time this all comes to fruition. And it goes back to ladder complement we've talked about before, engine complement, hose beds, water size, tanker, pumper tanker versus engine, like all that stuff comes into play when we look at that. The other note is I hope that people that like walk-in rescue squads and the larger heavy rescue vehicles hung in to the end of this podcast so they could hear the good sides.
I do love my job. I get to ride a rescue every day. Yeah, I do love it.
Like rescue squads,
I feel like I had to put a disclaimer. It's like, does this guy actually ride a rescue? My God.
We're going to have to go back to the beginning of the podcast and throw in a little disclaimer like, hey, if you're a rescue squad, hang in to the end. We come back to it, I promise.
It might be worth it.
And I think that was, again, I think you have to talk that downsizing first or right sizing, but sometimes right sizing is going up, and it is, does the wheelbase, increase or decrease when you go to a tandem axle? Does your turn radius get better? Can things improve by doing certain things to your squad? If you take the crew cab compartment out of it and put them in a walk-in, body, you've cut that little bit out of it. And then if you go with a shorter cab, which that might change here very shortly too, to where the cab might end up getting bigger than you want it to, because we just saw some pictures of that new motor. Things could change there too. But I think that the big squads are right for certain people. They're right for a lot of areas, especially when you get into that city, that urban that is required to provide a large service to a lot of people, and that you want that equipment where you can get to it easily. And that's always been one of my, we're gonna, as much as I'm, not a fan of riding in the back of the squads, I think that they are the most efficient way to carry equipment. So if you are deciding that carrying that equipment is right for you, I think that's the most effective way to do it. I mean, if you have to climb up on top of something to get to a piece of equipment or a long strut that you use a decent amount of the time, is it really efficient to do that versus having it right behind your head in a crew cab that's properly secured, but all that stuff is available and easy to get to. It's easy to get into a walk-in squad versus climbing those ladders. It's easy to get to the equipment that's you use up a majority of your storage space properly in those squads, where you're really only losing a small area of seating and the walk-in, but you still have ground ladders. You have access to everything you need. So there's definitely benefits to having them. It's just making sure that it's right for you and you are building the right type of squad for you in that sense.
I think as we wrap up, Win or Moody, if you guys want to kind of go through, and I can hop into, but the talks that we had in Arlington about the stubby versus the normal regular cab rescues, and how wheelbase and length were, people kind of got locked into that, and how there's more to that, and how we need to really look at all the numbers in that when we're looking at it. Because I think that really dives into that single versus tandem axle conversation. Everyone talks about, well, it's a shorter wheelbase, but that there's things there that can change, that it might not be more maneuverable though. So you kind of touched on it. I want to go deeper into that and really hit that point home, because I think even in Arlington, as we got together and put our heads together, we learned a little bit from that. And I think the committees definitely learned a lot from that, but we could have been blindsided by just going down this, it looks cool, it's shorter, we're good to go conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was a good example of, honestly, the committee doing its job of getting all of the information and saying, hey, hang on, like, these numbers aren't fully, they're not telling me what we were assuming they were going to tell me. And we went to the stubby cab, which ultimately shortens our overall length, extends the length of the walk-in, which sounds counterintuitive, but is how it's shaping up for us. But our turning radius was worse. So had we not investigated that turning report, we would have gotten this new unit in and been like, it's overall shorter, the wheelbase is shorter, but I can't make it around these roundabouts the same way I could make it in the last rig we just had. That was a mistake that we could have made if we did not do our job appropriately. And then all it took, those shorter numbers still mattered. We had to change our suspension. We'll go with a TAC 4 suspension so that we could have the actual turning radius that we wanted, that you would assume comes with an overall shorter unit. But had we not done that, we would have been blindsided, and we own the truck at that point. You're not going back to your manufacturer and saying, hey, by the way, I thought this was going to turn better and it doesn't. And, all right, well, we'll see you in 5 years.
Yeah, I think the key is making sure that you are requesting everything that is possible to make those decisions. And you said it, a lot of people don't look at the turn radius report, even though it's a required report. People don't look at it or don't understand it. What's the curb to curb? What's all of the numbers on the turn radius report? And then ask, hey, this isn't working for me. What happens if I go with a different manufacturer of axle? If I have a straight axle on it and I go to an independent front suspension, does that increase or decrease? Does my tire size, weight's going to drive some of that, but hey, what if I can drop a tire size? Will that increase that cramp angle? Will that change my turn radius? And you have to run the numbers for every one of those scenarios that you put yourself in that case, so that you can fully understand it. Again, what is my actual angle of approach and departure here? If that becomes an issue in your area, do you have big humps in the roads or things like that, or you go up big driveways and there's things we've talked about before, but how does that affect it? And again, if you put smaller tires on it, your angle of approach or departure may go down a little bit, right? If you put bigger tires on it, it may increase. But that may, if you put a wider tire on it, then obviously your turn radius is going to decrease. Your cramp angle is going to decrease a little bit. So it's looking through that whole process, not just, hey, we're going to do this because we've identified we need to have a better, we need to be able to get around our area better. So we can do these things and do this. But like you said, Alex, it didn't really work out that way. And if we weren't looking at that and paying attention to it, then we really you're in trouble when it comes in, and now you're stuck with it for the next, we're luckily in Arlington is 8 years, but for everybody else, it's 10, 15, 20 years that you're stuck with this fire truck that you can't get around your first due now.
And don't forget your seat weight. If you're putting those people in the back and you decide that you want 4, 5, 6 seats, 250 pounds a pop based on the standard, that's going to change things. So that weight report is going to be very different between a unit that you're putting all of your human capital in the back versus you're putting them all in the cab. That's going to change your ratings right there. I mean, that could be upwards of another 1,000 pounds. And then where are they sitting in the back? Because it's going to be different left to right. You got that 7% variance side to side. So that does change things, where you put your equipment. Those weights are so important. And the more comprehensive you can get with that information, the better decisions you're going to be able to make.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that's a huge thing. The cramp angle, just knowing it from different cabs, different manufacturers, different axles. This could be the same manufacturer of the cab with different manufacturers of axles, shocks, tires, springs. All of those things come into it. Even the new motor could change some of that stuff. So what is my cramp angle? What's my wheelbase? What's my length? That goes into tail swing, goes into tire rubbing. If I have tandem axle versus single, how much rubbing am I going to get with with an increased cramp angle? I can turn better, but might need more maintenance on the tires. Again, all that stuff plays into there. And make sure when you're asking about cramp angle, it is in both directions.
Yes.
I got that at College Park, and Arlington had an issue with that. Oh, we gave you your 45-degree cramp angle, which is it's a good cramp angle, right? But the other side's 38. Why didn't I get 45 both ways? Oh, well, you didn't ask for it. You want 45 both ways? You got to tell us. It should be a thing that you don't have to say, but you have to say it. If you're in a 30 to 35 degree cramp angle, something needs to probably change. That is pretty poor cramp angle. If you're in 50, that's probably the best you can get out there. 40 to 45, you're in a really good range there. So that's kind of just ballpark numbers to look at. If you see those numbers, those are good numbers. And again, it can improve and change based on a whole lot of factors. But, to me, if I had a tight street and I'm getting this vehicle to be very maneuverable, wheelbase, length, cramp angle, those 3 numbers I can compare and get me a pretty good start on what that vehicle is going to be able to do.
Yeah. Wall to wall is the other term that I was looking for there.
We'll copy and paste it back into the spot.
Yeah, that's where that overall length. That's where the overhang is going to come in, right? How big's your front bumper? Did you mount 5 tools off the front bumper that you have to, put on a rotating thing to get to them all, just because it looked cool, or did you, take your overall length and put a stubby, bumper on it? How does that affect us? That's that wall to wall. Curb to curb is, obviously where the tires are going to hit. Wall to wall is the overall length of the fire truck. So, and then obviously the cramp angle. And again, like Nick said, you want to ask them for a left and a right cramp angle. The right is what they provide. That's what the turn radius or the turn report shows all the time is a right cramp angle. You need to ask them for that left one and make sure that it's equal, or at least provide you with what you want on it.
Yeah. So on that note, now that Wynn found his words again, we'll end on a high note before we end. We go back down into the gutter again. But yeah, I think we covered a lot of information there. Hopefully, if you guys are looking at rescue squads, you have listened all the way through and made it to the end. There's a lot of good information to kind of pick at there in between. If there's any questions, any feedback, anything you'd like to see on future podcasts, we have a couple episodes coming up in the future now that we've actually gotten some recommendations from, and they're really great topics that we're excited to dive into. So please keep those recommendations coming. They really help kind of shape to what we've covered already and what everybody else is looking for. If it's something that we don't know about, we bring somebody on that knows about it, and we do our research to kind of bring you the right information. So if you have any suggestions, reach out. Nick, Nick, Wilbur, WILBUR, at evr.solutions. Send an email, any comments, anything that you guys have. And again, appreciate you logging in, taking the time, and listening to us. And thanks again, Moody, for coming back on to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Be safe out there, guys. Have a good day.